066, 27,000. Skate.
2, thank 2. Live group bullseye, 10067, 25,000 spades.
Thing 1, hostile.
Middle.
North.
Understand, crank north.
Affirmative. Martha.
Only a handful survive the RAF's selection and training system for its most exciting plane, the Harrier jump jet. Producing a frontline Harrier pilot is an expensive business. Training costs run into 7 figures. They make even a massive investment like this simulator cost-effective. Simulators reduce the exposure of a valuable pilot to risks involved in converting to the Harrier, a plane whose demands are at the limits of man's capacity to coordinate thought and action under stress. But simulation can't be the real thing. Planes do crash, pilots do eject, and some die. The RAF wants men who can do the job in combat, but in peacetime all the pressures are to minimise risk to its investment. This makes the Harrier instructor a key figure.
Flying the aeroplane, well, it's probably the most exciting aeroplane in the world to fly. Obviously, there's no other aeroplane that does that in the Western world. The power of the machine, you can do everything that any other aeroplane can do and more, really. I think that is what it is. And I suppose to a certain extent there's a bit of ego in it as well. You know that you are a pilot in a different aeroplane, and so that gives you a bit of kudos and a bit of self-satisfaction. We in the Air Force have our better chaps come to the Harrier. That's better in all respects. And the demands, well, a high degree of professional skill, a high degree of natural skill, level-headedness under pressure. Those are the sort of qualities that we're looking for. We're a low-level ground attack force, and so prior to the selection for the Harrier, we have got schools at the Tactical Weapons Unit and Valley, where they do a lot of low level, and where low level is taught and ground attack, and we get the better chaps at that particular job. So the selection is virtually done for us in terms of material that we get, and then obviously we have a selection system here where if the chap doesn't come up to grade, then he has to move elsewhere. Okay, Roger. We've had a bit of a layoff for weather. So what we're going to do now is a V-stall consolidation sortie. We will have tested the nozzles and the duct pressure downwind, and leave the nozzles aft and then into the finals turn. Certainly if it's too low, it will end up low here, and you'll never get your speed stroke ADD just prior to touchdown.
We'll be able to fly a normal finals turn in ADD, or will it have to be wider downwind?
Slightly wider, But I'll show you actually on the sortie that if we want to, we can fly as tight as any other aeroplane. We will then progress to the normal and most efficient way of landing a V-STOL machine, which will be the variable nozzle technique, or the wiggly nozzle as we say in the trade. Once again, a standard circuit pattern, so you don't have to worry about differing circuits. The key position again, once again we'll have that in the finals turn, not straight out this time. Here you select 70 nozzles, shove up the power to 85-90% depending on whether we're below or above hover weight. Double-decker bus off the runway, about 20 feet-ish. Crack the nozzles to the hover stop, hand back on the power, cushion the landing, plonk it on the runway, hand off the power and into your power nozzle brake. Straight through ground effect, plonk it on the concrete, throttle to idle, nozzles aft, and I'm in the habit of always putting the flap up because that's what we do on a field deployment, but you can leave them down on this occasion.
A V-STOL consolidation exercise, very short takeoff and landing, under close supervision, demonstrates the tight rein kept on student pilots and the continuous emphasis on routine procedures.
Takeoff, 3005 knots, Simpson active.
Takeoff 10.
Roger, normal takeoff then, computed stow speed, and then take the nozzles on a fairly flat climb away.
Okay, sir. Good fly out for MIGVs, star 16. 40 nozzles, deck pressure good, back to 10 is good. All captions right, all good in the back, sir?
Yep.
Brakes off R0, full power, and back to 99. Power we've got, lights are right, running looks good. And cleaning, off the ground. Nozzling away. Brakes, wheels, flat.
I have control.
You control, sir.
You can afford to nozzle just a little bit quicker than that, Rob.
Thank you very much.
Well, as a V-STOL consolidation sortie, Roger, that was pretty good. A, we got everything in that we wanted to do, and B, it was quite a nice sortie as well. We had the classic on the VTO, didn't we? We slammed the old power, top left-hand corner, gritted the teeth, and knocked off the limiters. You're then in a difficult area. At your stage, I think what you want to do, certainly if you've got a big area like we were on, is just throw it away. Drag off the throttle, keep the aeroplane on the ground, and just leave it there.
Despite all its efforts, the RAF can never be certain that it's selected the right few from its hundreds of entrants. Monitoring and training continues long after the operational conversion unit.
It's still very special, not least of all because when you get through the OCU, you've been trained to fly the jet, but you find out when you reach a squadron that you really know very little, and you're a little fish in a very big pond again. And the combat workup when you reach the squadron is 6 months of a very hard learning curve, and it's very exciting, very difficult. You do lots of things that you haven't tried before, and to a certain extent you get thrown in at the deep end, but it's still very good fun.
When you're flying with someone experienced, again on his wing, you fly in close formation through the cloud, and it's no real problem because you can relax, you can concentrate on formating on the bloke who's leading you through the cloud, pointing you at the ground, if you like, to land. When you're flying with a new bloke, you're not only concentrating on following his sometimes twitchy and jerky movements, but you're also, at the back of your mind, you've got to be aware that this could be quite dangerous, and you're forever monitoring not only his jerky movements and trying to keep in formation with him, but you're also having a quick glance in the cockpit every now and again to make sure that you are in a left-hand turn, or you are straight and level, and you aren't descending too quickly, and so on. So there's always this feeling, this very close supervision that must go on the whole time. and it never finishes, it never ceases.
It depends on being able to make pretty quick decisions in a very fast-changing situation. And you have to decide really very quickly whether you can get up that valley or whether the weather is going to be too bad and you're going to have to come round, or have you got room to turn round in the valley if you get to the far end and the weather is too bad. Or what happens if you pull up above the weather? Will you subsequently be able to get down again? These are sort of decisions you have to make very quickly. And generally, they're based on experience. You have seen that sort of situation before. And therefore, it's more likely that the older, more experienced pilots will get through.
The flight safety record in the Air Force and the measures that we go to increase flight safety, both are quite incredible. If there is ever an incident or an accident, no stones left unturned. We really do go into everything to try and find out why, and then the appropriate corrective measures are applied. But as I said, it is a risky business. We were talking earlier about firing weapons, where you ask a chap to gauge range to within 50 yards when he's in a 10-degree dive at 420 knots, say, I don't know, up to 500 miles an hour ground speed can be, pointing at the ground and firing a weapon. Well, obviously that is more risky than riding your bicycle down a country lane. But if the chap does transgress the minimum firing range, then he is told off and he knows he's in trouble. So we accept the risk to a certain extent, but we don't apply so much pressure or go out and take risks intentionally.
When you lead a 4 aircraft in a low-level formation with 2 targets, and 2 aircraft from the same squadron, 2 Harriers, are also airborne, and they are playing at enemy aircraft attacking you en route. And you have to beat off the attackers, or at least avoid losing any of your own formation and get through and hit the targets. And on that sortie, I think the heart rate's up about 200 as you taxi out for it. And it doesn't go down through the whole sortie, because as soon as you get yourself on track and going where you know you've got to go, lo and behold, in comes an attacking aircraft, and you've got to wheel and deal the whole formation to try and beat him off and then get going again before your fuel runs out. Well, the acceleration of a Harrier, when you do a takeoff with sort of half or third fuel left, is very, very good indeed. It's like 0 to 100 in 4 seconds. So it's pretty quick off the chops. And unless you're feeling quite sharp, you will be a couple of 100 yards behind the aeroplane.
I've never flown the Harrier. What am I missing? What do you feel like when you come back from a sortie?
Well, I think I better start off telling you what it's like when you go out on a low-level mission at 250 feet and 450 knots, which is nearly 500 miles an hour, is very exciting, particularly if you hold your low level, which we must do in the sort of current combat theatre. To fly that low, that fast, consistently, is very, very exciting indeed. You know that if you look down for half a second or a second at your map, you may risk bunting down into the ground. So it's a very high workload, but tremendously exciting. Second only, I suppose, to an orgasm, and a pretty close second at that.
you asked me who'd be best on my wing, probably the steady bloke. But that does not necessarily mean that he is necessarily the best pilot, the best war pilot, the best fighter pilot, the most aggressive pilot. I think it's two different arguments to some extent.
Our prime aim is to put weapons on a target, so skill in flying is obviously something that everybody has when they're on the squadron. Dependability, so knowing that they're going to do the right thing when a tricky situation arises. And thirdly, I suppose, that you don't want them to panic in any way. That if they can deal with a situation calmly, tell you what's... Excuse me. 1 Squadron, Flight Lieutenant Loader. Okay, cheers. Wrong number.
No panics.
Yes, no panics. That if they can tell you coolly and calmly what's happening, i.e. that there's an aeroplane attacking you perhaps, and they give you precise information about where it is and how far away it is, then you'll have a chance of getting back. And it's all that kind of thing, that you know the other person is going to give you correct information in good time.
It's good to have an incident which comes to no harm and has been corrected by the instructor, and find out where you can go wrong and see the limits of the aircraft. Whereas the ultra-perfect student who does everything right won't have seen the limits of the aircraft, won't have seen where things can go wrong, and if he comes across them one day on his own, might well not be ready for it. So in fact, there's something to be said for making mistakes all through your training and then being able to recognize them again later on.
Well, I think one of the constraints we have on us in peacetime is that we're flying very valuable bits of machinery and one takes as few risks as is possible. In wartime, one would inevitably take greater risks to achieve the aim, and there would almost certainly, I think, be some losses. But I think we are bound in peacetime by regulations which would not be there in wartime.
If you had any real doubts, then the pilot who you were flying with would never have got that far in the training machine. He would have been sifted out a lot earlier than that. If he couldn't basically fly through cloud, for example, or couldn't basically point himself at the ground without flying into it. So there is always that element of belief in his ability. But again, there's always the niggling thought at the back of your mind that perhaps he might make a mistake, and people do make mistakes, so you've always got to be aware of that and bear that in mind when you're flying with them. Yeah.
You're off to Belize on a mission. When you go off, you're not obviously going off to sweep the streets or to the office. I mean, you're part of a thing called the RAF.
Well, what we're trying to do is maintain what we think's a viable deterrent. For us in the Harrier world, it's a low-level, conventional capability to basically stop the Reds if they come rushing across westwards. And what we aim to do is be able to inflict damages on their forces if they come and try and take over Western Europe, and at least delay as long as possible the war escalating into a nuclear environment. I think if you were to chat to anybody, not just me, in the armed services, they would say that there is a very real threat against us at the moment. The build-up of arms by the Soviets is, you cannot view it as a defensive build-up of arms. And as long as you take that view, you must always be ready to meet the threat with some kind of ability to stop it, hold it back, anything, while negotiations go ahead, or to stop it going into a nuclear type environment.
In 10 seconds time, we'll be 0800. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
Visibility is about 3,000 metres, by 9 to 10 Zulu 5Ks, and then 8 to 12 kilometres. There should be no problems with the diversions. I think Binbrook, Whitton, although there are some patchy stratas at Whitton at the moment, and I think Manston is a number 1 and quite safe.
Station Commander, gentlemen, good morning. We've one selected helicopter flight today. That's Princess Alexandra, In the Wessex from Wharton to Lancaster University, 1305 to 1320. Are there any questions? Thank you.
So the selection procedure is very tough at the beginning. The idea is to take out the people who aren't going to make it right at the beginning before we spent too much money or wasted their time. So hopefully, as you go through your training, less and less people will have problems with the training. Ideally, of course, on the OCU then here, we shouldn't have anybody failing, which I hope is the case.
No, I don't think you can select it at the stage that you're selecting pilots for the Air Force, i.e. 18, 20-year-olds. I think then you're selecting pilot ability as determined by the ability tests they go through. And perhaps you're also, well, I'm certain you're also selecting them as a person. You're selecting their personality. But I don't think it's possible, it doesn't seem to be possible, to decide at that stage whether the two are going to go together to make a successful pilot. And certainly the suspension rate through flying training wouldn't indicate that we found a good solution yet.
The ones who are going to get on do seem to be keener, happier, usually a bit more boisterous, a bit more go to them, and generally enjoy their flying, want to fly, don't sit in the crew room when they're about to go off for an instructional trip, and rather not go, hope the weather's bad. That sometimes happens because you know it's going to be a hard trip. The ones who are going to get on are the ones who really do want to fly and who continue to fly and are happy to fly even though that trip might not go as well as some others. And of course they don't. You can't be perfect every time. Officer qualities don't necessarily make the best fighter pilot. I don't think the two necessarily go hand in hand. Sometimes the best fighter pilot is the punchy go-ahead bloke who's quite noisy on the ground and not necessarily what you would consider the best officer quality. So the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. Every time you go flying, you don't think, if I don't do this right, I'm in trouble. You don't think that way at all. You just get on and fly to the best of your ability. Obviously, some days you're jubilant because you come down, good trip. Other days you're depressed because you know you haven't done a good trip at all. But that doesn't necessarily mean you think that you're instantly going to be taken off the course. The ones certainly who are going to make it aren't thinking about and worrying about making it.
It is a small band of men in only 3 squadrons. There's one here in the UK, 1 squadron, and the 2 in Germany. And every Harrier pilot knows every other Harrier pilot. We all know what goes on in the Harrier force. We are proud of being that small body of men. We fly what I think every Harrier pilot would definitely say is the most enjoyable jet to fly in the Air Force at the moment, both in terms of the role, which is very exciting, low level, and also in the difficulty of flying it. You could just about say it's the best aircraft and with the best pilots flying them as well.
For 2 groups, 65, 36,000, possible through contacts, turning hot. Done. Fang 2, target south group 23,000. Fang 1, target north group stack 36,000, 13,000. Fang 40 scope, short skate, hot, right. Aspen 23. Fang 1.